So what we like to do is we let the staff introduce themselves to you first, and then I'll have you introduce yourself. So we'll start down here on the end.
I'm Brad McElhenney. I'm co-editor of the Gazette Mail. I had been at the Daily Mail, and this is our first go-round doing editorial board meetings together. So this actually results in two different endorsements, one by the Daily Mail and one by the Gazette, and they may be the same or they may be different. So thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm Whitney Burdett. I'm a Daily Mail editorial writer.
Kenny Kent.
I'm Dawn Miller. I'm the Gazette opinion page editor.
I'm Rob Myers. I'm the co-editor of the Gazette Mail.
And Eric there, State House reporter at the Gazette Mail.
Okay, and so I think we have one candidate who didn't respond, who didn't arrive. So I'll let each of you introduce yourselves. Just take a short minute to tell us why you're running, and then we'll do some questions and chat. Okay? So I'll start here on the end.
I'm Mac Warner. I'm originally from Charleston, live in Morgantown now. I'm running for Secretary of State to ensure fair elections, and I like to refer to myself as Mac. Easy to vote, hard to cheat Warner. The focus, I think, needs to be on ensuring fair elections, getting registration, getting people participating in the process, but the balance to that is making sure that the votes that are cast are everybody's entitled to one vote and only one vote. And so that's half of the job. The other half, there's many aspects to the Secretary of State's office with business registration. And I want to make West Virginia as business friendly as possible, cutting out any red tape from the process and making it responsive to the citizens and to the businesses. One, keeping the businesses we already have, but then also enticing other people to come to the state. I just became a grandfather about 2 weeks ago, and I want my kids and my grandkids to come back here and have good opportunities for employment, have safe roads, good schools, the things that all of us want. But we've just seen too many people voting with their feet, and that is leaving West Virginia. We need to start bringing them back, and I think that it all starts here in the Secretary of State's office with voter participation in our democracy, participation in our capitalistic system, and that's what I intend to do, is to enhance both of those aspects through the Secretary of State's office. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Natalie Tennant, and I'm currently Secretary of State, and I appreciate you all being here, giving us the opportunity, webcasting so everyone can see, and I want to say thank you to my opponents for being here and also moving it up, because I have to be in Morgantown by 3 o'clock. There's a pretty big event there. There's a lot of celebration at WVU, so I appreciate you all changing the time for me. You know, I have been here many times, and I've had the opportunity to talk to you all and have this discussion, Dawn, that we talk about. And I have come to you and told you my ideas that I would provide to the Secretary of State's office. And I'm proud to say that we have delivered on those promises. We've delivered on the promise of innovation that would save businesses time and money, whether it's an online chat or whether it's, you know, really enhancing the online annual report, being able to file your annual report online. We've really focused on that, and we've also cut late fees for businesses and for charities as well. And so I feel as though we've delivered on that promise. We've also delivered on the promise to take care of our veterans when it comes to interacting with the Secretary of State's office. Proud to say that we are the first in the country to have a pilot project that allowed our deployed military members to vote online on the internet. It was a successful program back in 2010, and one that I would like to continue to look and see, is it possible to continue something like that? We've taken care of our veterans in terms of when they come back after serving or retiring, they have a skill that they may have learned in the military, and so if they want to start their own small business, they can do so, and we waive the startup fee for them. We also waive the first 4 years of the filing fee for them as well. And we also have a vote in honor of a veteran program. So we've delivered on that promise. And I'm proud to say I've delivered on the promise of keeping the integrity of elections, because it has shown, and I have proven with my record, that we'll go after anybody who tries to steal an election, who tries to chip away at our democracy. We've also delivered on the modernization of elections, and with the successful implementation of online voter registration. And so I come before you again asking for your endorsement, but more importantly asking for the vote of the people of West Virginia so we can continue to be on the forefront of innovation, of transparency, and excellent customer service.
Thank you. My name is Barry Holstein, and I'm certainly honored to be with you here today. I appreciate the opportunity to express my views on certain issues, and would look forward to your endorsement as we move forward. The reasons that I'm running is, one, I am a lifelong West Virginian. I was born here, I was raised here in rural West Virginia. I've spent the last 20 plus years in service through the military, in Army and Army Reserves, as well as 20 years of operations management experience in the private sector. So the reason I'm running for Secretary of State is to bring that leadership and that operations experience to the government in a way that will help to lead the way in improving the integrity of our voting process. I think it's important in a democracy, in a representative republic, that it's one person, one vote. So my efforts, as far as first priority, is to continue to look after violations in the voting process, and to go after those as hard as possible. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, we hear about voter fraud and violations all the time, it seems, and so I think maybe each of you can tell us some more about what exactly it is you want to prevent from happening. Mr. Holstein, you mentioned it. Maybe you'd like to go first. What precise types of violations are you trying to address?
Sure. I think there's two opportunities to make improvements. One is certainly where folks are registered to vote, or we have names on the register, and someone who is not that person may go in and register a vote not in their name. I think that's one opportunity. The other is, and if you have spent time, particularly in certain parts of West Virginia, it's almost a joke that if you show up at a certain place on election day, you can get a pint of alcohol for a vote. So those type of activities, I think it's important to follow up on any complaints or any directions that you may be given as Secretary of State to identify those, go after them, find out who the perpetrator is, and then use the prosecutorial powers of the state government to bring them in and stop that activity.
Let me just ask you to clarify. The first thing you mentioned, you said you have names, people who are registered. Did you mean then people go in and try to vote as somebody other than?
Try to vote as someone other than themselves, yes, ma'am.
Does that actually happen very often?
You know, it can easily happen. I've certainly, at my age, I've voted many times. I walk in, I tell them my name, they hand me a ballot, and I go vote. There's no checks in place with that. I think the most recently, I think it was HB 4013 was put in place, and I think it was a very reasonable attempt at providing some means of check. There were a number of opportunities for folks to comply with that. I think it was very broad, meaning you could have a driver's license, a utility bill, student ID, Medicare card, insurance card. There were a number of ways, and again, I think they did a good job in making it very broad and not putting a burden on the voter, because I think that's important. But on top of that, there's an opportunity that if somebody, you know, say myself, if I show up and I forgot to bring any documentation, it's okay. There's an affidavit opportunity. I can complete that and cast my vote, and my vote will be counted.
All right, I'd like to hear from the others on this subject, and we might come back to something else. So who would like to chime in next?
Well, I would like to chime in. And Dawn, you said it with your question. You said you hear you said we hear, and I'm presuming you all, you hear about voter fraud. Well, that's what I say. You do hear it, but we don't have voter impersonation in West Virginia. In the 7.5 years that I've been Secretary of State, there hasn't been voter impersonation. Has there been election fraud with people trying to steal elections? Yes, there have. And I have a record of thoroughly investigating, my office, of thoroughly investigating any complaints that come into the Secretary of State's office. Whether we're working with the U.S. Attorney, as folks will remember the larger case, most recently in 2010 in Lincoln County, we pushed that investigation. We continued with that investigation. And so, I have a record of upholding the integrity of elections. And so, let's not confuse voter impersonation. So then, we've continued to go above and beyond when we talk about modernizing our elections. And so the next step is, and I hear a lot about this too, when folks say, "Well, what about these voter rolls? What about the voter rolls?" Well, back in 2013, we had a piece of legislation passed, worked with the legislature, that would give more tools to the county clerks to be able to do those checks with someone who is on the voter rolls. That they would be, here's an example, instead of just having a death certificate, they could see in the paper that there's an obituary of a particular person and then take that person off the rolls because of the obituary. It may have taken too much time to take them off waiting on a death certificate from a family member to bring in. So that was one tool in 13. And now, just this past legislative session, we had another piece of legislation passed, and it allows us to be part of this program that was started by the Pew Charitable Trusts, which is called ERIC, E-R-I-C, and it stands for Electronic Registration Information Center. Not Eric Air, not Eric Wells, but Eric from the Pew Center. And we actually become part of it. We become a member with the other states that are involved, and that allows the checking of the databases of those who are registered, those who've moved within the state, those who've moved out of the state. And it's going to allow the county clerks even more flexibility, because it will be the Social Security death index. Because there is a complex process for taking people off the rolls. A lot of folks will say, we just need to clean up the rolls and take people off. Well, thankfully, there is a complex process, and it comes from the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. And it identifies, a county clerk is required to send out a national change of address and see if there's any matches that may indicate someone doesn't live here anymore, that they've moved. Then they have to send a notification to them, and if they receive it back, then that person goes on an inactive list. And they go on an inactive list for 2 federal general elections. Now think about how long 2 federal general elections are. 4 years, as few as 3 years, if depending on when they've made these matches. And so that's what we've done to continue to modernize voter rolls, voter registration. I could continue to talk about that, and maybe you all will have the discussion back and forth, but that's what we've done in the Secretary of State's office. And also, when you talk about, we send folks out every election from the Secretary of State's office, and they are the liaisons who are in every county. They will have contact with the county clerk. They may be in some precincts. They go and if they hear that there's a poll worker who's having trouble changing the paper in one of the iVotronics machines, then they will go and assist then, or be that communication and liaison back to the county clerk's office. And so we are on the ground. We are seeing people who are going in and out, and that's the work from the Secretary of State's office, part of being on the ground during elections.
Just quickly before we move on, so it sounds like you're saying the idea of an individual going in and misrepresenting themselves and voting fraudulently is not a big problem.
Correct.
So the type of election fraud that is a big problem would be what type of?
Well, we saw an example is absentee ballot. When an elected official knew that someone was going to be getting an absentee ballot, and he came into their home and didn't necessarily say vote for this person, but just said I'm voting for these people.
All right, thank you.
And you all remember that from covering the schools.
Okay.
What you've just heard is a description of the process. But what I intend to do as Secretary of State is to apply myself and apply the tools of my office and apply the personnel in the office to make that process work properly. And what I want to do is cite for you just several examples. You've got, back in August of just this previous year, Don Serber wrote an article, and he described 3 counties in West Virginia that still today have more registered voters than they do eligible adults that are, able to vote. And that's in 3 counties. And so if this process has been working properly, you wouldn't have that situation. There's a woman who did some research and brought to my attention that we have literally dozens, if not hundreds of people over the age of 113 still on the voter registrations in various counties in West Virginia. That wouldn't happen if somebody was applying themselves to this office to keep that cleaned up. We still have voter fraud. We just had the mayor of Marmet removed from office just a couple months ago because of voter fraud. And this wouldn't be happening if people knew that there was a vigorous enforcement of the process and of the laws and thorough investigations throughout both the Secretary of State's, the county prosecutions and the federal prosecutions. You wouldn't have that joking that goes on about West Virginia and its election process. Okay, this isn't something that just goes back to the John Kennedy days and the bought election here. It has continued throughout the years, and we have to apply ourselves to take this very seriously and clean up the election process, and that's what I intend to do as Secretary of State. The key here is when you clean up those voter rolls. That's why it's so important. If you have this many eligible voters, but you have this many people on the registers, you have that much opportunities for irregularities, and those irregularities can occur in so many different places. There's problems with the registration system. As the front page of today's paper indicates, 2 county clerks, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat, in 2 of our largest counties, saying that there are problems with it. We need to apply. We need to be listening to these county clerks with all this experience and getting the system right before we kick it in. Yes, it sounds great. Let's go get increased voter registration. Let's bring in everybody that applies for a driver's license. Let's get everybody who graduates from high school, get them registered. That all sounds great, and we do want to encourage voter participation, but at the same time, we got to get it right. And what I'm hearing from clerk after clerk after clerk is the process isn't being done properly. It hasn't been coordinated properly, and they are frustrated when the forms aren't filled out correctly, when former names aren't given, when addresses are still being used with rural routes rather than the 911 addresses. They're coming back and saying that causes more problems for us in the clerk's office to try to track them down. And if they don't provide a phone number, how are we to get a hold of them? Then they think they're registered, and they show up at a precinct to vote, but they're not properly registered. We don't know which precinct to assign them to if they haven't put the addresses in properly. So we just need to work with these clerks, listen to the clerks, and apply it to our process to get it done right the first time. Then again, you have all these kids that are signing up to vote, or to be registered, but what is their real intent? Are they really intending to vote, or are they doing it to get a second ID for some other purpose, and they have no intention of voting? So then you have, at the election time, low voter turnout. There's all this uproar about no one's interested in participating and they blame it on the candidates or the parties or whatever. Well, it may have been because we had this flawed process to begin with, encouraging people to register when they didn't really have any intention to vote. You want interested, educated people participating in the voting process, and we need to make them educated about why it is that we are encouraging them to register at the DMV or the high school graduations or whatever. So there's just a lot more work that needs to be done from the Secretary of State's office. I wanted to get back one more point. The irregularities can occur at the registration process, at the voting booth, through the machines, through the counting, through the validation or verification afterwards. There's so many different places this can apply, and if you don't have somebody sticking to the knitting, applying themselves at each one of those places along the line, then you're going to have problems.
So that's why modernization of elections is so important. That's why the online voter registration is so important. You just heard Mr. Warner say that, if someone doesn't have a correct entry filled out, then a county clerk doesn't know where to put them in the precinct. That's exactly what he just said. Well, if you have an online system, it doesn't allow you to go any further without telling the voter to fill in that specific space. That's why the modernization of our system is so important, and that's why automatic voter registration is going to be a huge push forward also. And if I can just counter, because there's, I just explained the process that it takes when you are maintaining voter rolls. Now, it is the county clerks who must maintain those rolls, who must do that matching and that physical matching in the database. And then that's how you can kick off that process to begin that inactive to canceled process. It just doesn't happen like that, and it does take some diligence on the part of the county clerk to continue to do that. That's what happened in this new piece of legislation. Remember, I told you about that we had legislation passed in 2013? Well, the 2016 legislation now kicks it back to the Secretary of State's office to say to the county clerk, you need to do this. Because as any county clerk will tell you, Mac, and I'm sure that they have said that to you if you've talked to them, the Secretary of State's not their boss. I understand that, and I see that, but there are times when, as the chief election official, it has to be a uniform process. And the people of West Virginia deserve and anticipate a uniform process across the board. And he mentioned online voter registration. And I'd like to say that this system is the West Virginia online voter registration system. And we collaborated. It was a collaboration of the Secretary of State's office, of county clerks, because remember, 53 and a half county clerks are using this system. So it was Secretary of State, county clerk, DMV. We also had the work of the West Virginia advocates who advocate for people with disabilities working on this system with us. We worked with FFAP, which is, both of you probably know what FFAP is. It's the Federal Voting Assistance Program that is under the Department of Defense. And so our military members that I lift so highly had their constituency was represented in this also. And so this is a system that is good for the voters. And Mac likes to talk about listening to the clerks. How about let's listen to the voters? And when they have an opportunity to choose what type of system they want to use, we see that they have used online voter registration.
I just wanted to kind of tag into a couple conversation pieces here. One, because I've certainly been on the record and outspoken that I am not opposed to online registration. I think there's obviously some difficulties that we have to go through to make sure that it meets the integrity that we expect of an online voting registration system. Some checks and balances, I've got it, but I certainly support moving forward in that. However, one of the things that my colleague Mike was referring to, one of the things I've learned in my years in private sector operations management is I've worked in managing factories where you want to make gains and you want to improve systems and you want to do that, but you find it very difficult and you really want the input of those who are interacting with it, the voters, the county clerks. I found a successful recipe to that along my career, and that was when you gave feedback to those improvement ideas or to those recommendations, when you gave it didn't even have to be much more than an acknowledgement, and you gave that feedback to those who are trying to improve the system, then the amount of recommendations that you received grew tremendously. And so I think it's very important in this process and in clearing up the voter registration rolls and in identifying voter fraud opportunities. When those calls come in to the office or when those emails come into the office, you have got to be reactive to those and making sure that each and every person gets some reaction to that, so that they understand that their input has been acknowledged. And what will happen is you'll start getting, we talk about, well, there's not any news about voter fraud. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But you'll start getting more and more information to kind of help tie it all together and understand where it's coming from.
Mr. Warner, I want to clarify what you said. I'm trying to follow along. You were saying that you felt like that the easier it is to register to vote, the lower voter turnout would be because people wouldn't take it seriously enough?
No, I mean, the arguments are made that there was a low voter turnout because only 10% of the people voted or whatever. When you push this, the registration for every possible person in every possible venue, but you're not putting in the checks and balances that need to be there, which is what the county clerks are arguing for. Then you have massive numbers of people on the voter roll and not that many turning out. I'm simply saying that let's listen to the clerks, let's apply the process properly, and those that apply, those that register, you're going to have probably a higher percentage of the people because they registered for the right reason. They weren't simply registering to get a second form of identification with no intention of voting.
You're talking about like 17, 18-year-olds?
Correct.
What would they need that second form of identification for, other than their driver's license?
That's what I was told by the Logan County clerk, that they were simply registering for the sake of getting a second piece of identification. And they were using that voter registration card then as that second form of identification. When somebody might ask for, let's say they had a student ID, and so they didn't think that was legitimate, they say, let me see a second form of identification. Then they said voter registration card.
Couldn't they just use their social security card?
They could use
As a
any
second
number
form?
of forms. This just happens
So-
to be one that is done by the state and it has an air of officiality to it.
Well, it's done by the counties, and that's all the more reason for automatic voter registration because they're going to the driver's license, the DMV first, and then we'll get the voter registration because of that. So that you don't have to. I've heard that from county clerks before also, but
That goes back to the voter ID law that the bill that was passed, and Mr. Holstein, you addressed that a
Yeah,
little
he
bit.
explained it well.
But what are your thoughts on that law? Do we need that? Is it a good thing? The one that was passed by the legislature?
It was, and I give him credit and use his quote every time, but sometimes I mess it up. From what Senator Palumbo said, it's a decent piece of legislation for a problem that doesn't exist. And Mr. Holstein talked about the process of going to vote, but the one major part that he missed was the identification of your signature. Remember, when you go and register to vote, if you register in person, that is your identification that you're showing for the county clerk, and then you're signing that signature. If you, for the first time, are voting and maybe you registered online or you mailed in your application without photo ID, you have to show it the first time you vote. And then every time after that, your signature becomes your identification. And so that is, and actually, in this piece of legislation, as he referred to, that signature is still maintained as a main source of ID, because if you're talking about an affidavit, they're going to go take that affidavit back to the county courthouse, see if that signature matches up. So if it's good enough at the courthouse, why isn't it good enough in the polling place? And so, you know, I am satisfied that the ID that will be used is that voter registration card. Because he talked about, you know, you have to make sure people have accessibility to have some kind of identification. Well, if you can get registered to vote, well, now you can use that voter registration card, and that is your identification, along with a debit card, along with a health card. And I might add, for public consumption and information, that it doesn't take place until January of 2018, that you don't have to do that now and worry about finding photo ID, because you don't need photo ID, but finding a identification now, you'll still vote the same way you've always voted.
Okay. Mr. Warner, your thoughts on that bill?
I think voter identification bills are good. That's the trend that the country is going towards. 33 states have them, so I'm in favor of it.
Ours is a little bit more lax than a lot of states. Did you feel like it should have been stronger? Or?
I'm just pleased to see that there are voter identification requirements in place for West Virginia.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is confusing for us and for people who may be watching, but we've had some people
mistake. I apologize. I missed an email, and I'm sorry.
Okay, well, thank you for coming.
I made this young lady laugh. I said, I've been here since 10:30. I could have been here.
Oh,
a
no,
while
okay.
ago.
Well, then let's pause here and we'll give you a chance to introduce yourself.
Okay.
And very briefly explain to us, just like for a minute, tell us why you're running, and then we'll get back to our discussion of these various issues. So,
Well,
go ahead.
I am Patsy Treecost. My background is I'm a graduate of Fairmont State College. I was elected 16 years ago to Clarksburg City Council. Served there for 4 terms and was a mayor for 2 years. And I have since ran for House of Delegates, and I currently represent Harrison and part of Taylor County as a delegate. And the reason I chose to run for Secretary of State is that I just want to serve as many people as I can and represent people equally and fairly.
We were just talking about the other candidates' impressions of the new voter ID law. You must have been one of those who voted on that matter. What are your impressions of the need for that law or no need, depending on your point of view? And also the way it took shape, the way Ms. Tennant
We didn't get to
just
finish,
described
yeah.
it as she borrowed someone else's words and said a nicely formed law that didn't need to exist in the first place. But tell us what you think.
Well, the voter ID, one, we have to be careful. We don't have much voter turnout as is. And predominantly our voter turnout is the senior citizen age. We want to encourage people like we would in business to be as friendly as can be. And for some seniors, they may take this as another obstacle, as offensive in the sense that, we're the ones that have voted for generation after generation, and now you're asking us for ID. So, we've got to be careful that we stay friendly. At the same time, we want to secure that we have the utmost integrity in our elections. We want to be fair and unbiased. And as far as the voter ID, the concern is if we turn somebody away one time, would they actually ever come back? Or would they become part of 65% of people right now that are disinterested and have no intention of voting because they think their vote doesn't matter and that their voice is never heard? We've got to encourage people to get involved, and we've got to encourage people to go to the ballot and go to the ballot box, because we want them to know that the way that you find out if somebody is an elected official is by paying attention, and 2, the way your voice is heard is by not re-electing them if they don't live up to the standards and the expectation, 1, that they promised when they ran, and 2, the integrity that the office holds, and that is serving all people fairly and unbiasedly.
I'm interested in the presidential race, and I'm so not used to West Virginia's primary vote really mattering in that instance. Do you all think that we might get to the point where we still have multiple viable candidates at each party, that West Virginia's vote might mean the difference between a contested convention and what might both of these interesting races do to voter turnout? I guess we'll start here.
Sure. I think on the Republican side in particular, I think you have a good chance of getting to potentially a contested convention. Senator Cruz and Mr. Trump have been working very, very hard for that Republican candidacy, and are neck and neck going in. I think Senator Cruz is making some gains. So as we get toward the end, I think West Virginia becomes much more important to get the delegates to get the Republican candidacy. On the Democrat side, I think it seems at this point at least Ms. Clinton is leading, has a secure lead, and pending any potential issues that may arise, would certainly be the front runner for the Democrat candidacy. What has been shown, I believe, in other states is that, particularly for Mr. Sanders, has brought a lot of turnout. Wanted to go vote, So I think he's driving some turnout, as is Mr. Trump. Both seem to do very well in the media and getting the word out and driving voters to the polls. And I think that's exciting, regardless of what candidate you support. I think it's great that we have people who are running for president who will indeed bring people out to vote who may or may not have voted before, and because they get a little more excited about their candidate. And I think this is one of those elections that the voter turnout in West Virginia is going to be much larger than perhaps it has been in a while.
A couple of things, and it's interesting that you talked about will we have play, and you hate to answer a question by saying, well, it all depends. Well, and it all depends on tonight, though. I mean, I think that tonight, when we find the results of Wisconsin, that's going to be an interesting. Either way, you know, the projected is Cruz and Sanders to win, which tightens the race even more. And then New York is even bigger, so that's like April. Then we come in West Virginia is May the 10th. You know, there is that anticipation that we could be in